Okay, so to wrap up this section on race and ethnicity, so we were just talking about institutional racism and its impact on wealth, its impact on the schools you go to. It also has an impact on the environment in which you grow up in. And so this is, if you've ever heard the term of environmental discrimination or environmental racism, you probably thought, well, that doesn't make sense. How can the environment discriminate? And what that refers to, and I have a video in there that explains it, but it's so housing policies like ones we just talked about have concentrated people of color and people of color and poor people and people in lower social classes into areas that are environmentally unsafe or becoming more environmentally dangerous. And so it means that as climate change continues to happen, as our world continues to get hotter, we're all going to be impacted. But people living in areas that are more dangerous are going to be disproportionately impacted. And it's not even just climate change, for example. Like some of these neighborhoods in which that were marked in the redlining that were then were marked for concentrated for people of color. These neighborhoods tend to be more likely in close proximity to somewhere with environmental waste, to somewhere where the breathing conditions aren't as good, to somewhere that has water that's tainted. Like follow some of the stories that's happening up in Flint, and you can see one how literally people are there cannot drink safe water because of bureaucratic decisions that were made to save money. But these kind of decisions were made in a city like Flint and not in predominantly white cities. And so as you kind of work through that, you can see how, just, and for reasons like this. So as that's how, when we talked about a couple of slides ago, that consistently research finds that race is a more important predictor of later life outcomes, of health outcomes, of education outcomes than classes. And it's for this reason. It's for these policies that intentionally discriminate without being overt about it, but they intentionally discriminate against people of color. And then that results in people of color being more likely to be exposed to environmental hazards and have worse health outcomes, more likely because of economic discrimination to have to work in working class wage jobs that do not provide health insurance benefits, lead to worse health outcomes, which also intersects with those environmental concerns. For Black children growing up, being forced to go to worse schools because of these kinds of segregationist housing policies, and thus having worse education outcomes. Also, when you have elements like food deserts, and so not only are you going to worse school, but you also do not live in close proximity to affordable food. So not only do you take less resources in the school, but just more stressors on where we're going to find a meal that day. That's the kind of stuff that really compiles and then just provides more barriers for communities of color that white communities do not face. And thus, that's how we get to translate to the last thing I want to talk about, and that's privilege. And I want to talk about privilege because, one, I get extremely frustrated because privilege has now become like a Twitter buzzword. It's being used a lot, but it's being used incorrectly a lot, which is frustrating because privilege should never become a politicized word. It should never become a buzzword because what privilege means at its core, it's all about access to opportunities. And so if you've ever read something like on Twitter, somebody saying, well, privilege doesn't exist because I didn't just go to the white guy shop and get handed things. No, that's not what privilege is, and that's never what it's been. That is a misunderstanding of privilege. Privilege just means access to opportunities. And it means if you're somebody that is, so for example, if you're a white man, a la me, I have access to opportunities and have had access to opportunities that people of color didn't have, that women haven't had, that the trans community didn't have. Like, so there's all this different access to opportunities, but I was blind to it because I just thought it was normal. And think through that. If you just think, oh, of course I'm in college because I had a school that prepared me for it. Well, that school provided you many access to opportunities. Now, you still have to work hard. If you are somebody that succeeds and you recognize your privilege, that doesn't mean you say, hey, I just got handed it. It means I recognize I worked hard to take advantage of the access to opportunities I have. However, I want everybody to have the same access to opportunities that I had so that hard work always translates into success. Because What's really frustrating is when we don't understand privilege, is we don't realize many people that don't succeed. It's not because they didn't work hard. It's not because they weren't talented. It's not because they weren't brilliant. It's because they had more barriers in front of them, or they didn't have the same access to opportunities to see their hard work and their brilliance and their work ethic and their skill set translate into opportunities. And always the way to think about this, if you're struggling with how does privilege manifest itself, in gender and in race and in sexuality, like how does that work? Always think about being able-bodied. And if you are able-bodied, you have access to opportunities every day that people that are not able-bodied do not have access to. For example, if we were having this class in a big lecture hall, being able-bodied, you can sit wherever you want. You can sit in the back corner because you can walk up the steps and get to the back corner. You can sit in the middle. You can sit somewhere that's harder to get to, like in the middle of the classroom, so you have to squirm around. You can do those things. You have more access to opportunities to sit wherever you want to sit that makes you most comfortable and is going to maximize your learning experience. If you are not able-bodied, and you cannot walk upstairs, you don't have the same access to opportunities of where to sit in the room. There may only be a couple places designated if you're in a wheelchair that you have to sit in, even if maybe that puts you in an angle you don't really see as good, maybe you don't hear me as good. So your access to opportunities are limited, and you also have more barriers in front of you and less options than your able-bodied counterparts. Now, you still can succeed. You still can work hard and take advantage of those less opportunities, but lesser opportunities available to you, and do just as well as your able-bodied counterparts. However, you're not going to have the same access to opportunities, and that's what privilege is. So please, 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 at the very least in this section, I want you to learn all of it. Because if we're going to talk about privilege as a buzzword, if we're going to talk now every day about systemic racism, institutionalized racism, please know what they mean. Take the time to read it, understand it, and do not get defensive about it, because that is very easy, especially for those of us that are white. It's very easy to get defensive. That's what that book I told you about before, White Fragility, is all about. Why do white Americans and white people get upset and get uneasy talking about race and racism? And so try to understand, try to learn, and also when you're able to identify and see structures that perpetuate inequality, that provide more access to opportunities for some than others, then try to figure out how can we dismantle those structures so that everybody has the same access to opportunities. Because that's, if we really want to live, you hear all this time, we need to be colorblind. Well, we can't be colorblind because there's no equity. We have to have equity. Everybody has to have the same access to opportunities, because if not, if we're colorblind, then in mask all the inequities built into our structures and systems that are impacting people every day and impacting people's life trajectories. So please take the time to read it, to learn about it, and figure out how we can actually dismantle these structures and reshape them in a way that creates access to opportunities for everyone, so that everybody's hard work can be rewarded, and not just hard work plus access to opportunities takes success, is needed for this long-term success. Okay, so as I mentioned before, for the blog activity for this week, you're going to be learning about the social construction of race, and you're going to be using this link to go to the U.S. Census, and you're going to see over time how the U.S. Census has defined racial categories differently. But after you go through and spend some time, it's really interesting. Ask yourself, when you notice different race classifications showing up or certain race classifications going away, ask yourself what was happening in the U.S. at that time that would lead to wanting to add this category or take this category away. And then have a larger reflection. How does this teach us about the social construction of race? And being that race is socially constructed, what does that say about a society where so much of success and access to opportunities is tied to the race that we were born into? Okay. I hope you enjoyed this activity. I look forward to reading your responses, and I will see you all later.